And it was kind of asked about, well, how do we, you know, I think because, we hear a lot about, and in the prominent kind of church here in LDS, a lot of people kind of say, well, there seems to be this interesting way in which they make decisions. And then we know, then there's two outside of the LDS around the world, though. There's kind of they're not the only ones, but two major ways of seeing how the church then comes together and says, here's what we say, here's what we believe, or here is what we say is the guidance or the law of the church. And you'll often hear, what are the canons of the church? We're not talking about boom, boom cannons with a cannonball, but the canons meaning, what is it? The canon is, what is the guide? What is it that tells you what we do, say, believe, or so forth? So quite often, even in the Episcopal Church, we talk about what is the canons and constitution. And there's where, when I said the two kind of major thinking that people often hear of is what we would call traditional, maybe kind of Roman Catholic, because it's so large, kind of Roman Catholic thinking of where there's a very high magisterium, the Pope, and kind of from that, and I mean, and it's interesting if you kind of look through Roman Catholic history, people think that this is the way it's always been, but it hasn't. For close to the first 1,000 years of the church in Rome, the Bishop of Rome, who then gained the name of Pope, of the Holy Father, kind of as the first of the all bishops who had like more authority than the other bishops, which, by the way, that was not a norm until hundreds of years in the church. And that happened mainly politically. And it happened in two ways. The Roman Empire, as it became Christian, you then had, as it became, and Constantine accepted it, then it became one of the official religions, and then later on the official religion of the Roman Empire, which continued, although in decline, but continued for hundreds of years. There was the sense where, well, everybody in that Roman Empire, well, the bishop in Rome is obviously kind of like the political thing. The emperor is going to have more authority than the other bishops. But normally what has been, the earliest thing is each bishop, the episkopos, that's the Greek for a bishop is episkopos. So obviously the word episcopal means bishops, and which means we are governed, led by the ancient, not necessarily Roman, but the Catholic, the universal church's order of what we call the apostolic order of bishops, priests, deacons, and the baptized. And all are meant to be equal orders. What is different is each one has a different role and purpose. But they're not to mean, and of course, as we know, you get 2,000 years of church life and history, things happen. And it's gone like this. We've had this happen, and then this happens, and it changes, and then it comes back to this. But originally there was no pope, but the Bishop of Rome always had a sense of importance. And as Anglicans or Episcopalians, we are part of what we call the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We are part of the historic church from the apostles, in which we embrace, along with Roman Catholics, as well as Eastern Orthodox Christians. And then there are some of the Lutheran churches who have also remained what we call apostolic succession, who have also remained that, like the Swedish Lutheran Church, which Anglicans have been in communion with since the early 1700s, who have all remained in those orders. And so what happened then later on is the Bishop of Rome got kind of a higher authority, and then the Roman Empire, as it started falling apart, started splitting into the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. And Rome didn't have as much as importance. For a while, Constantinople, modern day Istanbul, became much more the Golden Crown. It was the Byzantine capital. I mean, it was, the place where, the church was thriving and growing, and the Eastern Empire of the church was growing like crazy. And so the Bishop of Constantinople and the Bishop of Rome were kind of looked as the two kind of biggies.
Wasn't there one in Alexandria too?
There was,
another,
and that developed as it kind of went on, because remember, actually, Egypt was the strongest, largest Christian population of any country, that was the earliest, if you want to say from the time of Jesus, the first country that became predominantly Christian was Egypt. Egypt was the center of learning for all Christianity. With the Library of Alexandria and also some of the earliest leaders of the church. One of the great saints of the church is considered St. Augustine of Hippo. Well, that's North Africa. North Africa is where Christianity was really happening. It was where the training, the education, the sending out, I mean, that was a center. It rivaled Rome early on, even beyond that. So you had that as the early place. So it always kept, even though later on politically it had less, it was one of the three major, what they call patriarchs of the church.
What happened?
Well, over time, of course, Egypt lost favor both in the Roman and Byzantine Empire, and then you had the final blow, really. What happened, of course, in Egypt is when Islam and the Muslim came in, it was a pretty intensive and pretty violent overthrow of Egypt. And I mean, of course, Christians have done the same. But, what happened in Egypt was a complete, almost genocide of Christianity, in a sense of just saying, you convert, leave, or we don't promise you anything. In Egypt.
I'm seeming to remember there was also a trend early on where Alexandria and Constantinople were the most powerful of the lead patriarchs, but then Rome was considered to be kind of this neutral tiebreaker because they were in this little backwater that used to be important but wasn't anymore because the Western Roman Empire moved its capital away from Rome to somewhere else completely. So the Bishop of Rome was kind of viewed as this, oh, well, you're this neutral party. You can be the tiebreaker in between Alexandria and Constantinople. But then we're the tiebreakers. That must mean we're in charge.
There was that, and then political resurgence moved, and then with the Roman Empire also there was the thing of, well, this is where Peter and Paul died, and there was kind of this significance of the leadership of the early church, and it just kind of grew, and unfortunately, there was a lot of political jockeying even in the church by the end of the first century, and that's what I'm kind of getting to. So you had Egypt that then had Christianity was under major assault. Now, what is interesting today, the ancient church of Egypt is the Coptic Orthodox Church of Egypt. And I've been there, and I've been to many of the churches and everything. They still have it's actually much larger than you think. It's about 20% of the population of Egypt are still Christian, or Coptic Christians. They are obviously the minority, but they're a significant minority, and they are basically the Coptic church almost remains completely unchanged in how it does everything, its worship and everything, since the 4th century. If you really want to see some really ancient kind of Christian things, the way stuff was done within their culture and all that's maintained. In fact, they still, and it's Copt is the name of Egypt in the ancient. So you have Arabic, but then you had what we call the Egyptian language of the, the hieroglyphs. What kind of came after the hieroglyphs, how it became spoken. The closest you have to that is what they call the Coptic language. And that is the official language of the Coptic Christians. So Coptic Christians learn not only Arabic, but they learn Copt. And I have a Coptic prayer book, and it has Coptic on one side and English on the other. No, excuse me what I said. Coptic on one side and Arabic on the other. And it is the closest to the ancient language of Egypt. It's much older than Arabic. And so the churches still worship in that. And they are a little guarded, even to other Christians, because they were so highly persecuted and everything. They kind of circled the wagons and said, we protect each other. So sometimes even when Western Christians come and we say, like, oh, we'd like to come and see, they're kind of like, why? You know, they get a little nervous, and it's understandable. Of course, in the last 10 years, there's been several of the big churches that have been bombed, both on Christmas and on Easter Sunday, where people have been slaughtered in the church by bombs. Okay, and although in a lot of places in Egypt, Muslims and Christians have developed, because they've lived together now for close to 1,000 years, a very just, you know, we think here it's, ooh, you know, the two never meet. Not in Egypt. When I've been there, you might have 20 people, and about half are Coptic, half are Muslim. They get together, they have dinner, they talk about each other's children, they even get together and do things. And they look out for each other, actually. In fact, the last time Christians were under attack, we're looking about 30 years ago, where there was an actual thing where they were going out looking for certain Christians. The Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church of Egypt was under attack, and one of the priests there, the Episcopal priest, and he had his wife and his kids, and the Muslim neighbors came and said, I've heard they're coming for you, and said, you need to get your children and everything, and you come to our house, and we will not let them touch you. And they brought their Christian neighbor over and protected and saved their lives. Because sure enough, they came to their house looking for them with guns. And so, you know, you hear about these bad things, and those are usually, as we generally should know, people who are just extremist and crazy. And they can be in any group or faith tradition. So I've digressed too much here, sorry. But so that's kind of what happened in Egypt, and Christianity kind of took a little bit of a downturn, especially in its leadership. And then you had most of the libraries and places that things were done were destroyed, many of them, unfortunately. But there's still a great health and an interesting life there if you go there. So what then happened is the Roman Empire, as we know, it kind of waxed and waned. And what happened, of course, then later on, as we know, Constantinople fell. Well, and which is now Istanbul. Now, of course, in the Byzantine area, there's still a large Christian presence, but not like it was. Christianity in the Middle East have been under assault for centuries, and it's taken a great toll. Like a lot of people don't know that there was a significant population of Christians in Iraq. They're called the Chaldean Catholics. They are Chaldean Christians. They trace back to the 3rd century, 2nd, 3rd century. And they've almost all been either wiped out. The 80% of that total population has now left Iraq, so they wouldn't die. In fact, the largest population of Iraqi Christians in the world is in El Cajon, California, just on the outskirts of San Diego. Yeah. And I've done a wedding for a Chaldean Catholics, and they're an interesting group, let me tell you. You know, so,
I wanted just to add to what you're saying, that many people don't know that Russians and Ukrainians are Christians.
oh yes, yes, yes.
And many people don't know that.
Yeah, the
I
Eastern
have
Orthodox.
seen Putin doing the cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure Hitler did some of those
Yeah.
things too. So, it's an interesting thing. And then again, unfortunately, even there's political ties in here.
Exactly.
So you had this thing in Rome developed, and then right at 1000 AD, one of the most horrible things that it's an embarrassment to Christianity is the Bishop of Rome and the Bishop of Constantinople decided they were going to go for a knockdown drag out of who is in power and wanted control and power and authority. Contrary to everything Jesus teaches, they acted contrary to that. They said, no, we are right, we're right, went back and forth, and then they both excommunicated each other. And because of that, that's why today in the West it's the Roman Church, and in the East it's the Orthodox Church. They were all one church.
What was the big division?
It is
Baptism?
stupidity.
Whether or not the Holy Spirit proceeded from both the Father and the Son, or from
There is one theological thing. The Eastern Church, and get this, all over just a little bit of wording in the creed. It's called the Filioque clause. When in the West we say, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son, and with the Father and the Son is worshipped and glorified. In the East, we believe in the Holy Spirit, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father, and with the Father is worshipped and glorified.
Oh,
And that's what they split over.
They use that as part of it.
the Crusaders sacking Constantinople probably had more to do with it, in terms of practical.
It was mostly politics, but what they did is they just said, well, you're wrong and you're wrong, so we'll use that. But there was also a thing about authority and orders in the church, and it was, put it this way, you take about 5 somewhat theological things that they kind of did this, but it was mainly about politics. And so they excommunicated each other and they went their separate ways. And for almost 1,000 years, they have never officially spoke. They know that they are pretty much identical. It's like having your family split down the middle and you're still all family, but you haven't spoken to each other for 60 years or something. And it's all kind of silly when it comes down to it. Well, there has been in the last 50 years the beginnings of that resurging, and the most strongly, people don't realize the incredible mind-blowing historical significance that Pope Francis went to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And I'm trying to remember was it Russia? Where was he? Greece I'm going blank on where he went. The city, one of the major, because in the Eastern Orthodox Church, instead of like bishoprics where they call them patriarchies, and the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Patriarch of Moscow, like that. Okay, so Francis went to them, came to them and said, will you forgive us for the foolishness, the error, and the arrogance that Rome had in this 1,000-year division? And most popes, I'm not going to do it. We'll wait for the Eastern. Now, what happened was he was generally greeted warmly. The leaders were very, I would say, warm and hospitable. But I don't know if you saw it, but it made some of the news. When the Pope showed up at these churches to do these in these massive cathedrals, there were people outside screaming and yelling, death to the Pope, death to Francis. And because, can you imagine, they don't even know why. A 1,000-year-old grudge over nothing that had to do with him. And they're saying, don't let him in. He's Antichrist. In fact, that was one thing when they excommunicated each other in 1000 AD, they both proclaimed each other as Antichrist. So there you go. And one of those joys of not so great of Christian history. So that's where you have a division there. But that is crumbling. That's crumbling, thank God. It's coming along. Anglicans have enjoyed a pretty good relationship, especially in modern history, with both. Actually, theologically, Eastern Orthodox have always liked Anglicans. We've had in fact, kind of with the Russian Orthodox was one we developed a relationship in which work that was done in Alaska and that was done by our church and stuff. So we've had some of these good relationships. And with Rome, of course, Francis, I think if he had his way, would say, okay, so what? They got married priests. Let's just, he does feel that in a sense we're kind of united. So you have all of this background and how decisions and stuff. And now in Rome, they still have the papacy. Now, again, papacy as modern day papacy did not happen. And I'm trying to remember the year. Gosh, I should look that up. The year in which the Pope said, I'm infallible. There was no such thing as infallibility. That is, In fact, that's how the beginnings of Reformation started, because in Europe, what they called the old Catholic churches were all these Catholics in Europe who went, whoa, the Pope one day just said, I'm infallible. And they went, no, you're not. Never has been. Peter wasn't fallible, and neither are you. And split. Okay? And then, then that set the seeds for then more Protestant Reformation. So in our mind, in Western thinking, we have church governance that we think either in Roman high hierarchy, or because then of later what happened in the Protestant Reformation of extremely Protestant thinking. And those are kind of been guided into two thoughts of what we think is Catholic way of governance and what we call congregational. What has happened among American Episcopalians is when our church began in the 1780s, was they said, okay, we can't be the Church of England, obviously, because we're not under England anymore. This is now the United States. So they said, okay, we'll be called the Episcopal Church in the United States of America. And they said, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make decisions? What do we do? We're starting from scratch. In a sense, the American church began the Anglican Communion, because before then, it was just the Church of England or the Anglican Church in another kind of places around the globe. We became the first one independent, autonomous, that was no longer under the governance of the Church of England. So we said, what do we do? Well, you had a lot of the major writers of the Constitution of our country were Anglican. And at the same time they were finishing our Constitution, they would leave, go down the street to Christ Church, Philadelphia, and sit down and say, okay, now let us work on the Constitution of the Episcopal Church. And what they did was they maintained and that's why they kept the word Episcopal. We are Catholic, but we are also Reformed. So what they said was, well, how are we going to make that happen? And again, this is just the United States. So what we did is we now have nationally a blend of both ancient Catholic order and not congregational, but in a sense, a Reformed that is democratic. It's really interesting. Somehow it works. Not always easily, but it works. So let's start on the national level then. Governance was set forth in the Constitution of our church. It says, now think about our American Constitution and ours, and think about some of the corollaries here. In the United States, you have a president, a House, and a Senate. Okay? That's your main, you have the judiciary. Okay? So when they said, you know what? How we will make national decisions is we will have instead of the archbishop, we say presiding bishop. Presiding bishop, archbishop, same thing. Meaning a bishop who has been elevated in leadership for specific purposes. Okay? So, like in England, that'd be the Archbishop of Canterbury. The second one is the Archbishop of York. Those are the two big key places in the Church of England. In the United States, we said we will have a presiding bishop to help lead the House of Bishops. So then you had, okay, presiding bishop, president. Okay. Then, House of Representatives and Senate, they said we will then have two governing bodies with the presiding bishop. One will be called the House of Deputies. The House of Deputies is made up of delegates from every diocese, geographical areas in the United States, like the Diocese of Utah, Diocese of Indianapolis, Diocese of Western Louisiana, Diocese of New York, whatever it may be.
How many are there?
There's around, I think we have like 128 dioceses or so. That's not the exact number, but it's,
That's close enough. I
yeah.
was just curious.
Because some, like Utah, it's just one diocese.
Right.
But you go to California, there's 7 dioceses in one state. You go to New York and some of the East Coast where there's just thousands of Episcopalians, you've got multiple dioceses. Well, like there's the Diocese of Los Angeles, and it's kind of around the LA area, but that place has like 200 congregations in this small area. We have 30-something congregations for the whole state of Utah. Okay, so it's a bigger geographical area, but it's, you know, you kind of, they all originally started big, and then if some places got bigger, you had to divide. Like, for instance, San Diego, where I was, used to be a part of the Diocese of Los Angeles, but then as that whole area grew and grew and grew, they separated and have the Diocese of Los Angeles, and now the Diocese of San Diego. Okay, like where I grew up in Louisiana, it used to be just the Diocese of Louisiana. It's the Diocese of Louisiana, and the part where I grew up in is now part of what they call the Diocese of Western Louisiana.
Oh.
So there's two there. Okay, so they said the House of Deputies will every diocese will have 8 delegates. 4 will be clergy, 4 will be laity. And they will, all 8 of them will be elected by the people of that diocese. Okay? So you have this House of Deputies, which is big. Every diocese is there with half clergy, half lay. Then Senate, okay, House of Deputies, House of Representatives. Then you have the House of Bishops, the Senate. So the House of Bishops are obviously all the bishops who are in jurisdiction in the United States and the church in the United States. That also includes places like Haiti, which is of baptized members. The Diocese of Haiti is the largest diocese in the Episcopal Church.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's right.
Huh.
The Diocese of Haiti is the largest. We have, and there's French speaking. So, and then you also have the Diocese of Puerto Rico, which is interesting, was originally part of the Episcopal Church. There for a while, it then left the Episcopal Church, not left out of any bad, but they started this Caribbean province. And so they came in and they became part of that. But what they found was, for reasons, if you want to know, I could tell you more, but it just didn't work out real good for them. And it was much more beneficial, especially since they're already connected to the U.S., to be a part. So they rejoined the Episcopal Church. And I remember that wasn't that long ago, and I was there when it happened, and there was a big celebration. We were so happy to have them back. And Puerto Rico used to be, when I was in the Diocese of Missouri, that was our companion diocese. Mm-hmm. And as she knows, our companion church was actually the San Juan, St. John's, mm-hmm. and that was in the town of Pinuelos, mm-hmm. up in the mountains. So one of also our other major dioceses is Spanish speaking. So, and actually just in the last 20 years, you know, we've always been kind of we think we're this really white privileged church, in which in some ways we really are. But that's not really true, and it especially has not been true in the last 30, 40 years as we've become a much more diverse church. And our leadership, not only do we have, think about in the House of Bishops, we have a large number of women bishops now. We have a lot of people of color. You have African Americans. We have the Bishop of Missouri currently now is actually from Barbados. So he's not African American, he's Caribbean, but a person of color. And we have Latino, we have, you name it now. And before that was just unheard of. But that's significant now. So you have in the church, they recently had said whenever any official publication comes out from us to the people of the church, before it was only done in English, but now everything is to be also published and made public in French and Spanish. And so, I have to admit, the Diocese of Haiti was kind of like, it's about time. They were kind of like, so that's been kind of a big thing. So for us, we have those houses. So now you say, well, what do they do? Well, every 3 years, we have what we call the General Convention of the Episcopal Church. So since the first one was in 1789, and there was 9 dioceses, basically the old New England, kind of down to the south a little bit, colonies. And they met for the first time and met as that. And we've been meeting about every 3 years, ever since, except for one during COVID, which was postponed. So, and we meet in different locations, and thousands of Episcopalians come. And I have been elected as and I said delegate, that is wrong. Excuse me. That's in a diocesan convention, you're a delegate. This is, I know it's maybe odd sounding, but to the national, you're a deputy. It's the House of Deputies. So it means you've been deputized to make decisions, but you're not a delegate in the sense of you have to vote as what people told you to, as a representative. You were to take that into fact, but in the end, each should make those decisions upon their own conscience. That's the difference, okay? So when you go back and if somebody didn't like the way you voted, you can say, well, obviously I can't vote for everybody the way they'd always like, but in the end I did all the best I tried to, which you've entrusted me to, and I made that decision, okay? So, excuse me for that mistake. So every 3 years they gather, and then what they generally mean is legislation is brought in. In the interim years, you have what they call the Executive Council. And the Executive Council is made up of laity, clergy, and some bishops, and they are the ones who were voted and elected to say, in between the 3 years, make sure that any decisions we need to make are followed upon per the Constitution and the canons of our church. So at General Convention, when that happens, we vote on a million things. And if you had to see when everything was done by paper, when you went, you got a book about that, and I'm not about that thick. And we had over 32 committees and task forces and stuff on everything. And so, I mean, it was pretty intense. We have narrowed that down. What happened when I was a deputy was one of the things we voted on was to say, we're going to eliminate all of these committees on this and this and this and, you know, the pain of the church or whatever. And said, if it doesn't have to do with the marks of mission, we're not going to have a commission on it. We're only going to put our energy into what is part of the mission of the church. And so we're going to focus on that. And that was a very big step to kind of, you know, it was much more organized, like the General Convention and how those all set up to make it was organized like a big what became popular in the 20s and 30s of America as modern American corporations. It got set up like a business, and we said we're not a business, and so we said we need to change that corporate model and into a mission model. So that did happen. So it's been kind of all that blah 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 out there comes down to a little bit smaller now, which has made us more efficient and actually made us more focused on the gospel. So that is a good thing. I felt very incredibly honored to be elected as a clergy deputy from the Diocese of Missouri, 3 times as a deputy, 1 time as an alternate deputy. And so I've got a chance to see this on the ground running, and was there as some historic legislation. You know, I was there during the major thing of the people who were extremely more conservative in the church and those who say we feel the Spirit is moving us on. You know, there was things where sometimes it always wasn't pretty, you know, and unfortunately, you know, people are people. And, you know, when we got to things about who will we say are acceptable in the full life of the baptized of the church, will that include, you know, just name any group that's going to be ones that we have problems with. And for us, it became a focus, and for some reason in America, this has been with many churches, about where people have wanted to divide over LGBT issues. I mean, the Methodist Church is in a horrible snip with that. We did not have a full actual split, but what happened was the Episcopal Church, through this process of allowing democratic things of input and debate, because on the floor of the House of Deputies and on the floor of the House of Bishops, somebody brings forward and says, we will say that all baptized members are full members of the church, equal and available to all the sacraments of the church, including ordination, marriage, whatever it may be. We will not put any obstacles. When that was done, there were some people like, no, not everybody's equal, and we don't want it going to everybody. And so they got up, and for 2 days I sat for 10 hours at a time listening to people fight over this. And there's times where you just go like, I'm disgusted. I'm just done. I don't have a lot of, I have to admit, on that I don't have a lot of patience. I mean, I understand it. But when you listen to people who are saying, you know, you're disgusting, you're evil, you kind of get tired of it after a while, okay? And now what happened was when the Episcopal Church made some big decisions to say, we know not everybody's going to like this, but we feel this is the decision we've made. And when it came down to the voting, we voted and said, we're doing this. Now, we knew there would always be a cost. Now, what has happened was it didn't officially break, but some people left. And eventually some of them started, there is a breakaway church here called the Anglican Church of North America.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And basically they said, well, we're going to take everything from the Episcopal Church except women have no voice and LGBT people and other non-desirables are not welcome. So basically they want to be 1940s, 50s America.
Is it very large, though?
No. And they have said, they claim that they are an equal Anglican, part of the Anglican communion. But to be that, the Archbishop of Canterbury has to say, we recognize them as a province of the Anglican communion. And he said, no, there is only one representative of Anglicans in each country. And the Episcopal Church is that presence.
Didn't they reorganize themselves to be recognized under the province of Nigeria or something like that in order to still claim membership?
They have a relationship, and this is in what we call the Global South. What has happened is in the Anglican communion, and that's when you get to the bigger one here, there's division there too. And we see this at Lambeth. And God, I forgot, there's so many layers to this. Oh, I gotta hurry up here. I gotta get moving. But every 10 years, all the bishops of Anglican churches throughout the world, wherever there's an Anglican independent province, so like the Anglican Church of Canada, Episcopal Church of the United States, the Anglican Church of Mexico, Anglican Church of Honduras, the Scottish Episcopal Church, the Church of England, all around the world, the Independent Church of Philippines, the Holy Catholic Church of Japan, all of these, the bishops will come every 10 years to England by the invitation of the Archbishop of Canterbury to meet for what they call the Lambeth Conference. And Lambeth, the palace that the Archbishop of Canterbury lives in is Lambeth Palace. That's where he lives in London. And he's called the Archbishop of Canterbury because at Canterbury in southern East England is Canterbury, and that cathedral. It really isn't, but for many Anglicans, it's kind of close as we get to a Vatican. I mean, in the sense of, Canterbury Cathedral, if you go to England, you got to go to Canterbury. You know, Canterbury, Pilgrims on the Canterbury Trail, you know. And so, and there is the seat of St. Augustine, who was the first Archbishop of Canterbury. And, you know, and so on these 10 years, this was just this past year. Lambeth met this year. And all the bishops went, and the Archbishop of Canterbury presides over that. And this one had some contention, and of course what it was most of the bishops said, come on, let's talk about the gospel, let's talk about mission, let's talk about what's really important. Some of them said, we need to talk about what's happening in our countries of, you know, Bangladesh are losing all of its shoreline, and we have climate, and we need to talk about what can we tell our people about making our worlds better and about, you know, the good news even. So what happened was they came there ready to do that, and some of what we call the Global South, not all, but there's a grouping of those like in South America and in Africa who said they are still obsessed with human sexuality. And for them, if you don't agree, you can't say, we may not agree on this, but we're still one in Christ on the main things, but we differ. Okay, that's the normal Anglican stance and what keeps us together. They say, if you do not agree with us, you are not even a Christian. And I mean, it's a major, well, what's happened is you then have these other bishops are going like, really? For God's sake. And so they got there and said, well, those of you who accept those people, we're not going to come and take communion with you. I mean, it is a bad witness. Okay. Now, what happened is where I give the Archbishop of Canterbury credit is he turned this one around and got them to focus on saying, what is it? It kind of said, you're called to be a bishop. And you better start taking this seriously, that this is about unity of the faith and about what our message is in proclamation to the world. Deal with your own crap if you need to, but don't always bring it to the table and force it upon others. It's not always as easy as that, but it's funny, you know, just like it took a process of years to get it through our country and other countries, it's going to happen, but part of it is understanding the culture and where some of these countries are and everything. Because there's one thing that people point out, here's the one kind of thing that's really interesting. For years and years and years in many of the African countries, polygamy is still legal and accepted as okay. Well, the mainline Christian, including Anglicans, is we say that marriage is to be a monogamous marriage between two persons, not 5. But what we have done is said, okay, instead of coming in as colonialists and just saying this is what you will do, they said, we're going to understand that this is a process in which we hope that you will grow to understand why we believe as Christians this is important, but also not say your culture's wrong. And so we have never said, okay, you can't bring your 5 wives to Lambeth with you or whatever, some of these bishops, and there's a few of the bishops who are polygamist. And we don't condemn them, but they then want to turn around and condemn people for basically the same reasons because they don't fit into the norm box. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that's kind of, So, you know, sometimes they're a little hypocritical about that.
But the Archbishop of Canterbury cannot order people to do anything.
Yes, and one important thing, thank you, because what happens is, whereas the Pope has a central authority where he can say, you will, the Archbishop of Canterbury, literally his only full authority is within the Church of England.
Yeah.
In England. And so, because he is the Bishop of Canterbury, but he's the Archbishop then of Canterbury, the main see, S-E-E, which means the head place of a diocese. Like the see of our diocese is Salt Lake City. So, but he is, the title that the Archbishop of Canterbury has in the Anglican world is first among equals. Okay. So here we do the original Catholic order that said all bishops have equal authority as chief pastors. But often you need one person as a spoke, and so basically the Archbishop of Canterbury serves as a spokesperson for the Anglican Communion, and also as one to hopefully bring all of the bishops of the world together and to hopefully find ways to bring us so that we centralize our mission together. It's not an easy job. Some people think, to be Archbishop of Canterbury, I wouldn't want it. You couldn't pay me enough. You know, because, I mean, you can't, everybody's mad at you all the time, you know. So that's what you kind of have. But you have, and so remember, around the world, we've got about 78 million Anglicans around the world, and what we call the Anglican Communion. You know, I mean, just like in New Zealand, it's the Anglican Church in New Zealand, the Anglican Church of Australia, which is quite large. In Canada, it's very large as well.
Do you have an idea in percentage how many Christians in the United States are Anglican?
Yes. Though what we have in the Episcopal Church, unlike some churches, had got better about being honest about our church role. You know, there's people who've been on sometimes I look at these rolls have, you know, been dead for 50 years and they're still on the roll of membership. The Episcopal Church tightened up what we said, who you count and why, you know, even without making it a major thing, but said, let's just be clear, you know. The Episcopal Church currently in the United States is about 3.5 to 3.8 million. That's pretty small.
And most of them are East Coast, right?
No. The biggest gaps of Episcopalian is basically all along the coast, though, in the sense of
Right.
go down, start in New England, go all the way to Florida, then go across the south, and then up the west coast. And then there's a big pocket in the upper Midwest of what they call the Beretta Belt. It's from a high church area of the 1800s along Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and those areas also, where you'll go to small towns and find Episcopal churches. But like you go to, go to Virginia. I mean, you can go to a small town and they'll have 3 Episcopal churches. I mean, you can't throw a rock without hitting one. But you go to Montana, you're going to drive a long ways, you know. I mean, even Utah to some extent. But although Utah was, we've got a good many. So, but the Episcopal Church used to be about, in the 50s, it was around like 6 million.
Wow.
But that was also inflated. It was probably closer to 5 or something like that. But what has happened is we had a big drop in like all historic churches saw a big drop in a little bit in the late 70s, a pretty big in the 80s, and real big in the 90s. And right now, we're one of the few who is actually growing. In fact, another example, the Scottish Episcopal Church is the only historic Christian church in Britain that is growing. The official church, the Church of Scotland, which is Presbyterian, is in massive decline. It's sad. I mean, they're closing churches almost daily. But the Episcopal Church there is smaller, but it's growing. And part of it is this reason that churches like in the United States and Scotland and other places in Canada and stuff have said, we believe that the Holy Spirit calls us to engage the people we live with in our world and culture today. And that means dealing with difficult questions. So what is happening is we say we want younger people. Well, part of it is a lot of the younger people are going, why are some of the people of like even my generation older, why do they fight about all this crap? I mean, really, isn't there more important things about who you think is good enough or worthy enough? People, and this is my experience, and I know, we have some younger people here, is basically we've learned is a lot of younger people saying, we don't expect a perfect church because we know there isn't one. Second, you don't have to have everything perfect together, but we want it authentic. Please be who you say you are is who you are. And they also want a tendency to say, we welcome openness and diversity. So what has happened is
Not just say it.
Yeah,
But
to live it.
actually
Live it. You're right. So what has happened is and I keep doing this. When I've done some things about welcoming churches, training, and about evangelism, saying, "Come on, people, you have a gift. Now that we've made it and we're here, open our mouths and our lives and tell people we are here and this is who we are, warts and all." And what I find is generally the people who come and want to be here say, I can deal with that. And, no matter where you are. So that's yes, sir.
Due to the history of the church, I thought it was fascinating that it kind of didn't start, but really grew, and the base was in Africa. Did the church later ever have to go through racial issues, which would be monumentally hypocritical, it seems, if the founding fathers were...
Well, what you have in Africa in modern day Anglicanism, most of the Anglican churches that you see, the reason that we have some of the issues today is the making and our own fault of white Western Christianity. Because what happened was, now there was American ones who came in, but England in the late 1800s, early 1900s, did massive missionary activity in Africa. And it was mainly done by what they called the evangelical wing of the church, which came in and said, here are rules, and this is the way it is. Well, they believed what they told, and so in a sense you can't blame them. They're following through on what they were told, but now they're in conflict with the very people who helped found the churches. because we set that as a precedence back then. And they don't quite move maybe as fast as we do on some things. So that's kind of a problem of our own making. Although most of Anglican churches did not go in like some missionaries and say, you have to stop being who you are, you need to be a white European, therefore to be a Christian. One thing Anglicans have generally not done, have tried to make Africans or anybody else, the Church of English Tea, and said, this is who you are, and have established to raise up their own leadership. See, and it's part of that problem too, is because the leaders and all of the bishops, they don't have white bishops. They don't have us still trying to tell them what to do. All the bishops and other leaders in these Anglican churches in the global south are native people from those countries.
In fact, I think this land, the majority of bishops were black.
That is correct. In fact, in the Anglican Communion, all of us who are white in here are a minority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had in Haiti, they had, the constitutions really says the church, there should be no interference between religion and the people's right. But we had a discussion in the Senate where they were trying to criminalize homosexuality.
Yeah.
But there was no discussion of homosexuality in the constitution, but people wanted to bring it forward as
Right.
a criminal act. But the thing is that the folks who were arguing to criminalize homosexuality, they're doing it from a religious perspective.
Right.
And I was pleased to see that the majority of the people in the Senate were like, you cannot bring a religious perspective into the law. But when I think about it, like if I look at traditional Haitians, like in Vodou, people are very open and welcoming regardless of your sexuality. So a lot of times these conservative views we see within the churches in Haiti, they are being imported by Western
Exactly.
Christian values, and now that we want to move forward, we want to be open and everything, but now it's like you're fighting against the same values that were brought to the country.
Yeah.
It's not really like a Haitian thing to say you can't love who you love, but it's something that was brought through Christianity.
Right. Yeah. And see, part of the problem that we're having with people in the world, people have issues with the church today, is basically some of the mistakes. And it's okay to say, we have Christian, people get real defensive of the church. It's okay, we've made mistakes. Some are bad, some are little. But one of the things that we made, some things in the 18th and 19th century, the 19th and 20th century, was in some of our missionary efforts, we're now reaping what we sowed. And kind of like in Africa and Haiti. And there were things that we brought in that really weren't central to the gospel or Christian message, but it's now there, and there it is. So therefore we have to deal with it. I realize we are way late. I'm going to end this here because, and I'm sorry, I digressed and I apologize. We kind of got into a lot of stuff that was ended. So, but we kind of set this thing about a kind of a national stage, a little bit of national. Next week is we have off because we're all going to be like hopefully making Advent wreaths and stuff together, and have some. Oh, and I think there's going to be cider and hot chocolate and all that stuff too. So everybody come and have fun. Bring a friend with you if you want. They can have an Advent wreath too. But the next Sunday, I'll just finish up, and what we'll talk about is we'll just kind of go down to there's that U.S. thing, and there's just one thing I'll follow up on that. And then we're going to just talk about, how does that now translate to a smaller area, the diocese? And then the one that's most applicable, and it's easy to kind of explain though, is then in your parish or your congregation, what do we do? And that's where those terms and stuff will come up. And if you have questions about what these are, there's everything, in priest there's a rector or a vicar. And in the lay governingship, there's either the vestry or the bishop's committee. And all these things and how things are made. So we'll talk about that and we'll be done. Okay? And then we're going to move on to, in the beginning of Advent, of someone, and this was brought up. I had several people come and said, could we have a discussion? I know you touched on it during, last time I did the confirmation or inquirers class, and I did one section on our spirituality. How do we live that out within even worship? And there's people, we have a lot of people coming from all kinds of backgrounds, and they want to know, well, like, why do some people, when they come in, maybe bow before they sit down? Some don't. Why do some people stand? Why do some people kneel? Why do we have that thing over there in the church? Why is this? And why do we have that? And why is that color? Why do you do this? You know, so kind of saying, what is the significance? Why does it matter or not matter? And what is the spiritual significance? So we'll take a couple of weeks to do that, because a lot of people said, we really do want to, and that's where I'll get you to think about all these things you're kind of wondering about, but maybe there's just